Hey guys, Pastor Sam here. Super excited to have our next episode of A Biblical Perspective. And today I'm going to be interviewing a guy by the name of Joe Watkins. And Joe is the father of a friend of mine, fellow church member, Russell. And I've really enjoyed getting to know Russell, and I've had some conversations with Joe, and just appreciate his testimony, his spirit, his attitude. And so I just asked him if he'd come in and have some conversations with us and just get his perspective, Christian perspective, on some things in life and just what he's going with. So it's my honor and privilege to introduce you guys to Joe Watkins. And so, Joe, thank you for being here today, taking time out of your schedule. As we get started, Joe, if you don't mind, would you tell us just a little bit about your testimony, when you got saved, kind of where you're from, what you do, what you did?
Well, I had a similar experience to a lot of people in this area, I guess, or anywhere. I went to church. My parents carried me to church, a church not a long ways from here. And, of course, we had a revival one summer, as we always did. And I remember I was like 12 years old. Of course, for some reason, in Southern Baptist churches, that was the magical age, you know.
It's 12?
Yeah, for some reason. I don't know why it was always thought about that way. But I remember hearing, and I don't even know what was preached now, but I felt urged to go down. Mm-hmm. And I did. And nobody really ever took time to talk with me at that point. And ended up, I think the preacher asked me a couple of questions, and then got baptized in a creek. And they had made a baptistry and sort of made it so the water was diverted. But anyway, all that happened. Well, traveled along through teenage years, and a lot of wrong thoughts and wrong doings, but the Lord kept me from what I call, or what a lot of people might call, major sins, but I don't know if there is any or not, but you know what I'm saying. Mm-hmm. I was still...
You didn't get in too bad of trouble.
Yeah, I was still in church, and then there used to be a thing in Winder. They had it at the Lions Club called Teens for Christ. A lot of people my age remember that. And it was just a lay person that sort of arranged that and get different speakers in. It was on Saturday nights. And so my wife and I went because I knew a guy that was going to speak. And he talked about some things, and it really got a hold of me, the gift of salvation, and convicted my heart. Well, I couldn't wrestle and figure out if I was saved or not. But just to cover myself, I said, I don't know what I did then. Mm-hmm. But I know what I believe now, and all the key things, because he laid it all out in his sermon, mm-hmm. what the plan of salvation was. I don't think I got that as 12 years old. Right. And so, honestly, I don't think, I used to try to go back to that time as my salvation, but I went ahead at that age, and of course, the Lord started working on my heart about things in my life to change. And as time went on, I realized I needed to be involved in some kind of service for the Lord. So my wife and I tried working with teenagers. That was not it. Now, you ask, well, that was wasted time. Why did the Lord let you waste the time? Mm-hmm. Well, I don't think it's wasted, because there's a young lady that's got several kids of her own now. I gave a testimony a few years ago that she got more out of my teaching than she had anybody. Mm-hmm. Now, what humbled me was thinking, she went all the way through Bible college at Pensacola. Mm-hmm. And I think it was Pensacola. And so she had some smart guys, right, biblically. And I'm just a dummy, doing what I need to do. And for her to say that, it said, I think the Lord just said, you shouldn't feel like you need to poke your chest out and be impressed with yourself, but realize that when I got you something going on, if you think it's not just what it is, sometimes I'm working even right now. Right. And so Eventually, this guy spoke with me about doing the jail ministry, and I said, can't do that. He stayed on me for probably close to a year.
Mm-hmm.
Finally, he came to my house, and I was not at home. I was at the church working. We were building some stuff. And he said, hey, I've got the jail ministry started in Barrow County. You'll be there Sunday. But your buddy, he'd been trying to get a friend of mine, my best friend, to go also. He said, he's going to bring the message, but you be there. So this guy used to be mean before he got saved, so I said, I better go anyway. So we went. My buddy gave the message to county jail, and he said, hey, come on with me. Let's go see if we can get in at the city jail. That's when they had a city jail. So I said, fine. So we went in, and I'm happy to go with him. He goes in and says, fellas, we're here to not to preach at you, but to give you the gospel. Joe's got something he's got to say. Not prepared. Had heard a message that I remembered portions of it, the scripture verses, so I just flipped, and you know, I probably stuttered. I'm no worse than I'm doing here today. But a guy got saved that morning.
Well,
And
yeah.
I said, well, Lord, maybe you can use me for something.
Amen.
And that was March of 1981. So now I'm doing Barrow County Jail on Sunday afternoons. I go to Walton County Jail on Sunday mornings. And Oconee County passes it around to different churches in the county. So we get to do it 1 month. In January, I go on Saturday mornings there.
Okay. So you got, hang on, so let me get this story straight. So you maybe got saved at 12, but there was another experience at, so you said
At
you
19 years old.
At 19, and you said me and my wife. Now, were y'all married?
No, we were just dating.
Just dating, okay.
Yeah.
But she went with you, so you
Yeah.
and your wife
Yeah,
were dating at that time. Y'all went.
yeah.
You nailed down your salvation.
That's right, and
So
I really
what-
believe that's when it happened. I think 12 was a case of do better, as I call it.
Okay. Yeah. So what year was that when you were 19? What?
Well, let me think. I guess that would have been 1970.
Okay. So it was about 10, 11 years later before you started the jail ministry.
Mhm.
So you're in your late 20s.
Yeah.
And so you and your wife, how old were you when y'all got married?
I was 19, she was 18. Too young, but, you know, I
Well,
guess it's working.
Yeah. How long y'all been married now?
What is it, 48 years, I guess?
Okay. Well,
Yep.
I guess something stuck. You
Yeah.
know, 19 and 18.
Well, you know, and this may not be part of our conversation necessarily, but it's a thing that I present to people. She and I both, in our late 20s, or maybe even before that, started feeling that the Lord had something for us to do.
Mm-hmm.
Besides just go to church. You know, I believe if a person gets saved and they're going to sit on the church pew and that's all they're going to do, why would the Lord not just say, well, come on up here?
Right.
If you're willing to work for me, you know, I'm willing to work with you through some of your sins and your failures. But if you're not going to do anything, you'd be better off on up here. I mean, you know what I'm saying?
Oh, I'm with you.
But
I agree
anyway,
with that.
what we found is, at that point, when we started saying, Lord, what is you want me to do? And as He's drawing us this way toward Him, we're actually getting closer together ourselves. And you start having better relationships. See, I believe we're created. I'm a chainsaw carver. I don't know if you know that or not, but I carve things out of chainsaws. People, cowboys, Indians, you name it. And I tell folks this, I'm just a mere man, and not a good one at that, but I've never have cranked that chainsaw and stuck that end of that chain into a log, said, let me see what jumps out. I mean, you remember Aaron about the calf, he said, I throw this gold in here and see what jumped out. That's crazy. That's the way I am. Somewhere between these ears and this little brain of mine is what I want it to be. So when God created us, I think at that moment, He said, this is what I want Him to be. Now, I used to work in aviation, And there's something about pilots. I don't mean all pilots. I don't mean but it seems like a lot, especially military pilots, have an ego problem. I fly an airplane. And I used to know one guy said, I was born to fly. I said one day to him, you may be a good pilot. You may enjoy being a pilot, but you weren't made for that, because those are temporary things. The things that are eternal is what we need to be looking at. Now, it's fine to be a good airplane pilot. It's fine to be a chainsaw carver. But those are, he said, occupy till I come. Those are just occupations.
Right.
And so I think and I believe there's just a very minute percentage of people that ever grasp that, and so they never are complete at peace with themselves because they're not doing what they were created for.
Right.
And I didn't mean to run on with that.
No, it's good. So you worked in aviation. You got married at 18. How old are you now, Joe, if you don't mind?
Just turned 68.
68?
Yeah.
I'd have never guessed that.
Thought I was a lot older, huh? Well,
early 60s, late 50s,
you
maybe.
deal with what you got. A couple of weeks ago, we was with Russell and them, and my wife and Jamie were shopping some, and I asked Josie, I said, Josie, you think your grandma and your mama was finding something during their shopping to make me pretty? She said, you mean like a wig? So, you deal with what you got.
Okay. Well, all right, so you're 68 now, you got saved 19, married 19, started doing prison ministry in 81, so that's almost 40 years you've been doing prison ministry, which is crazy to think about that. The way time goes. You're a coroner, correct?
Deputy coroner.
Deputy coroner, okay, so not the elected official.
That's right.
Coroner, but you work with the coroner's office.
Correct.
And so, in your time as a man, and just your experience and perspective, being in and out of jails, talking to a lot of people, having a lot of conversations, being involved with the coroner's office, taking death calls and these kinds of things. At your age now and being 68, turning around, looking back over life, what is, so you made the comment, you said God created us, we were created, right? And so God has a purpose for us.
Right.
And so what would you say to a young Joe, or so I'm 31 and I'm about to be 32, right? I'm married, March will be 10 years. I'm really excited about this, a decade. I've been married almost a decade. And my wife, she said she plans on staying around too for like another decade. So
that's good to hear.
So I'm excited about that. But what would you say to a young guy, or what's something you wish somebody would have told you at my age, or when you were 20s, or something like this about life?
Yeah, I'm sure I heard some messages that might have pointed toward it, but I really wish that even as a teenager, I could grasp that I was created for a purpose instead of floundering. And obviously none of that has to do with your occupation necessarily, because we all got to do something. But we talked about before we started recording, I think, about whether duties as a parent and duties as a church member or a deacon or a pastor or whatever, whether they conflict or not. And I don't think they're at odds. I think we let them do that sometimes, but I wish I had the grasp on that as a younger fella, that I did have a purpose that was going to have eternal values. And I've used this illustration with the guys at jail before. What we think about what's important. Back in the late 80s, I did some flying, and we actually did something, and the governor and about 200 people were there, and they gave me an award for saving a guy's life. That was a good day. I mean, you was at the forefront, people patting you on the back, and a guy thanking you for saving his life. And, it sort of put us in a little bit of danger doing it. But now, whether or not he would have died or not, I don't know, but they say he would have. Well, it was a good day. Now, this guy was probably in his 50s. And there's a good chance he's not even living now. So what good did I do? Maybe I prolonged his life for 15, 20 years. But then a guy pops in my head that was in the Barrow County Jail, an alcoholic, in and out, kept seeing him. But one Sunday, he gave out the gospel, and he said, "Joe, I need to get saved." Well, he called me Mr. Watkins and led him to the Lord. But, sometimes you wonder where they are and the decisions they made. Well, he got out, and next thing I know, he shows up at my church. Started coming. Then one Christmas, actually, my dad quit driving, and we sold him his truck, and this guy was at church all the time. And then one Christmas day, he said he was at his dad's house, and his brother's a principal up in Forsyth County. They were all there, and he said, "I don't feel good. I'm going to go lay down on Dad's bed." They went to check on him, and he was passed away. 52 years old, had a heart attack. And I thought about those two things. It was a good day for me when they presented me with a little award. I don't know where that award is today. I don't know. Now, would I have still done the same thing? Sure I would have. But which one has the most weight on me right now? I am so glad that I showed Michael the plan of salvation. Because I think 1,000 years from now, somewhere on them streets of gold, he's going to say, "Hey, Joe, you remember when I got saved?" And I said, "Yep." And so which one's the most important? If I could come up with a cure of cancer today, what kind of name would it make for me? It'd be great. But is that good for eternity? No. And most families have been plagued with that big C word that we don't hear. But nevertheless, that would weigh less than leading someone to the Lord.
So that's interesting that you say this, because I wanted to ask you, what's something that you wish somebody would have told you? And so what you're telling me now is, at 68, you wish you would have been able to grasp the importance of living for eternity. And so one of the questions I was going to ask you is, what do you wish would have been conscious? Like, what do you wish would have been in the back of your mind, almost on a subconscious but conscious level as you're going through life? Because I think, so I'm 31, and I've got friends obviously relatively close to my age. And one of the things that I think about a lot is just, okay, what is valuable in life? Like, what's the purpose? What do we need to be doing? Where do we need to invest? And I challenge the church to think about these things too. In Paul's letter to Titus, one of the things he told Titus, he said, "Let the older men teach the younger men, and let the older women teach the younger women." And one of the things that I'm always trying to learn from older men is, like, what is important? Because I don't want to waste my life. I don't want to waste the next 20, 25 years of my life and then get to be, in my late 50s and 60s. When you start getting to a place in life where you have more time behind you than you do in front of you, you start to think differently. Maybe your decisions, you start to reassess, revalue. And so I think, if I don't want to put words in your mouth, but what you're saying is, like, for us to be conscientious of eternity, and that heaven and hell is real, people are going to spend eternity there, and it doesn't matter. You can get accolades and awards and praises of men, but for us to be living a soul conscious, a spirit conscious, an eternal consciousness, and that it doesn't matter if you're working. So what, you did aviation, were you a mechanic, or what did you do in aviation?
I ended up at retirement. I was a tech inspector. I inspected other people's work.
Okay. So whether you're a tech inspector, I was a forklift mechanic before I was a pastor. I farmed. I know you got horses or mules, both?
Just horses.
Just horses. And so we do these things in life, but that's not what life's about.
Right.
That's not our purpose. So our purpose would be to glorify God, eternity, love people, see people saved. I mean, is that?
Yeah, I love Ecclesiastes. Solomon, supposedly the wisest man ever. And the whole book of Ecclesiastes was nothing more than a study by him to find out the meaning of life and what the whole thing's about. And all through it, he uses a phrase that it's all vanity and vexation of spirit. It's all under the sun.
Mm-hmm.
Now, my contention is if we look for things over the sun, then it's not vanity. And he talks about wisdom, how important it is. Then sometimes he says some things that wisdom is not as important, but he means that in a whole different way. But the bottom line is he does that study all through 12 chapters.
Uh-huh.
In the last 2 verses,
Yeah.
He says, let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Now here's a guy that's heard him speak for 12 chapters talking about the meaning of life, and he said, I tried everything. I tried going crazy even. I tried to have men singers, entertainment. I tried to build me buildings and pools, and I had all these things. And he's experimenting. You think, man, this guy has the resources to really research life. I don't have. I can't tell you what it feels like to be able to have my Learjet ready and go to Hawaii right now. I can't do that. Now, he didn't either, but in his day.
Down, or what's wrong with your Learjet?
Well, it's in for phase inspection right now.
Okay.
No, I'm just kidding. But, and then when he gets to the end of it, he said, let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. But then my eyes are glanced down. Why I'm not seeing 22 more chapters, him giving us this conclusion? But he's got 2 verses. He said, here's the conclusion of the whole matter. In other words, my study boils down to this: fear God and keep His commandments. This is the whole duty of man. I may have missed a word or two there. I was hoping you was going to open.
Oh, did you want me? You were giving me time. Well, I'll open there, and as I'm turning there, I just think for the sake of the listeners, I think for people to be conscientious to understand. So Ecclesiastes was written by Solomon. Solomon was the son of David.
Yep.
And Solomon was one of the most wealthy and powerful men in the world in his day. I mean, I would imagine probably he would have been the world's superpower in that day. And, Queen of Sheba, I mean, everybody was coming to Solomon for his wisdom, to glean from him. The Bible tells us that David left him barns full of gold. I mean, so this is a guy who had everything that the world has to offer. And at the end of his life, when he turned around after experiencing everything that the world has to offer, all the money, all the power, all the fame, he had many wives, concubines, the Bible says, prestige. He said, vanity, it's all vanity. It's all worthless. And then he says, let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter.
Verse 13.
Verse 13, yeah. Fear God and keep His commandments, for this is the whole duty of man.
Right.
For God shall bring every work into judgment with every secret thing, whether it be good or whether it be evil.
And I think we have to clarify what fearing is, because sometimes people think I'm supposed to be like he's fixing to use his big swatter and swat. But to me, after this many years, now this may be what I thought, because I thought about things at a different angle when I was 29 years old and first starting to do it in the jail ministry. But I think some different things now. That word fear is caring what God thinks about it. It's not fearful that He's going to swat me, even though He could and probably should. But it makes me care about what He thinks and wants. And that's what I think the fear, and of course, some people think the commandments is just those that we see trying to get taken down off the courthouse doors,
Right.
But it's not the case. It's full of them.
There's a lot more.
And so, and some of them aren't necessarily written. I mean,
that's right.
He's going to deal with us in the New Testament times without the signs and all these things. So I think we have to take that one verse and dissect it a little bit. That's how I have to do it anyway. And want to do what He would have us to do. And what I found out is this. Now, I know I'm taking up time with this, but I think this is important. people would pat me on the back, possibly for going to the jail without stopping for, 38, going on 39 years. But what I've told people is, when I started, my mindset was, I'm going to try to help some people. And nothing wrong with that way of thinking. But what I've found out at this age is, I'm the one that got some help. I talked in the old Barrow County Jail, which is the museum building now. You talk to the bars, through the bars to the guys. The plumbing was always leaking. I mean, it was a dungeon. It was one of the worst places I've ever been in. But there was a big guy there one day says, I can't get saved. I said, why not? He said, you don't know what I've done. I said, well, let me trump that. You don't know what a Savior I've got. And he said, well, I couldn't do what you do. And I said, and I had a motorcycle back then even, we talked, and I had a tag on my truck that said motorcycle. And I said, when I leave here today, I've got a better satisfaction than just about anything I do. I enjoy coming down. He looked around, he said, how could you enjoy coming down? He says, you're a weirdo if this does something for you. I said, I told him about riding motorcycles because he had a Harley tattoo on his shoulder. And I said, I've got a motorcycle at home full of gas. I could be riding to the mountains today. How's that sound? He said, sounds great to me. I said, I'd rather be doing this, and I do not understand that. How can I understand it? But I believe, and I think you'll attest to this, when you finish preaching on a Sunday morning or a Sunday night or a Wednesday night, when you're finished, if you've done what the Lord wanted you to, you feel a satisfaction that you can't measure no other way.
That's true.
I told this guy, I said, when you was a kid, did you play with little cars in the dirt? And he said, I sure did. I said, well, I know this afternoon y'all get some yard time. I'm going to borrow some of my son's Matchbox cars, and I'm going to come down here, and I know the jailer up there, he'll let me back here. And you and I are going to get those cars, and we're going to make us some roads. He said, man, you a fool. I don't do that no more. I said, so you're not the same as you were. He said, that's right. I said, if you get saved, turn your life over to the Lord, you'll enjoy things that you don't even imagine, and they don't have side effects. So he didn't get saved that day. In fact, he sort of went the other direction. But I just think that that's why I love the book of Ecclesiastes, because you get down to, and it's got some humorous stuff in it. You've talked about the keepers of the house, and what they represent. I think it represents a person. I shared with a guy yesterday that puts in security system. I said, well, I've thought more about that. When you get old, you get more fearful of things. And Ecclesiastes basically tells us that. We rise at the sound of a bird, he says. So, used to, I ain't worried about that noise, but now check it out. But Solomon had it together when he wrote that. And I think the conclusion is something that, two small verses at the conclusion, but I think it's something we ought to chew on for a while. Didn't mean to go on again.
No, you're fine. So, so I posed the question. I said, what is something you wish somebody would have told you? And maybe it would be the same answer, I don't know. But I would also be curious, what is something, and I'm going to ask you this question, and I know sometimes this question, it may be even hard to put into words, but the answer. And so if you don't have an answer or something like that, that's fine. But so what's something you wish somebody would have told you, something that you'd have been conscious of? But then also, what's something that you've learned and you understand today that you had to learn for yourself? Like it's something that nobody could have told you, nobody. And I say that, I'll tell you a story. So I know do you know Johnny Wright?
Very well.
Johnny. So Johnny was my pastor growing up, and he had a tremendous impact, has had a tremendous impact on my life. And I remember one time I worked with him and for him, and I don't know, I was 20, 21, something like that. And he came in the shop and he said, he said, Sam, he started to tell me something. And I said, yeah, I know. But I didn't stop what I was doing. I didn't acknowledge him. And he goes, Sam, and he repeated himself. And I said, yeah, I know. I said, I know. And he said it, my name again, said it again. I said, I know. And I kind of, was like, I know. And then he got a little huffy with me. And he goes, Sam, he said, I know you know what I'm saying, but you don't understand.
Yeah.
Because you're not old enough. And he said, you don't have enough experience under your belt to understand what I'm trying to tell you, son. And I remember I stopped. And at that time, I was mad. I was like, don't tell me. Don't tell me what I know and don't know. But, and I'm still young, but I'm, approaching 32. And even at 32, I understand now what he was saying, about just living life and having time under your belt. And how sometimes you can try to give somebody a piece of knowledge. You can try to transfer knowledge, right? Let me tell you this. But sometimes in life, you just got to go through life and time and experience to have a right perspective, a right value, to have your values change, and shift. I know I just put a mouth.
The question was, what I wish I had understood what I was talking about earlier, that we're created. I mean, I was at a panic a little bit because what I thought I wanted to do for a living out of school didn't end up working out, and I fretted about that for a while. And honestly, looking back, I had a drill sergeant that used to say, don't sweat the small stuff. And then he'd hesitate and he said, it's all small stuff. Because honestly, life pretty well is. And the things that I get worked up about sometimes are not going to be there in a while, everything from traffic. But anyway, back to the thing is, I wish I had understood that I was created for something besides being a, this or that, or
making money.
Yeah.
There's more to life.
Because what I found out, no matter how much money I make, that's what I'm going to spend. Pretty much. I might save a little bit, but I see, when my wife and I were young and been married for several years, she worked for some doctors. And they were big football fans, and they wanted to go to every game. Well, the problem is they had kids. So, I didn't care about football. So they would pay us to come live at their house for days and keep their kids. And they say, whatever we got, you can eat, drive my car, whatever you want to do, just take care of my kids. Well, we got there thinking these folks are wealthy folks and we're just poor folks sometimes. Open the refrigerator, these folks don't have anything to eat. And I realized I was living a little, as we might say down south, a little higher on the hog than they did, except for the big cars and this, that, and the other. And I come to realize that those things aren't that important. Now don't get me wrong. You just talked to me today and I'm running here and there making $1.
Right.
We always seem to want but a little more. But there's nothing wrong with, he talks about that we need to provide for our families, but I wish I'd got a hold of those eternal things that's going to last and pointed more toward those things.
Okay, so, all right, so let me, okay. So my next question then would, I think, align in this is understanding value, and then with that brings, before we turned on the cameras and began to record, you talked about that word balance. You brought up that word balance, and you mentioned it. And so, because the reason why, so one of the things that I'm always saying, I'm finding myself talking about this more to the church and just to people in conversation, is God's trying to teach us value, okay? And we talk about eternity, and in eternity, I look forward to the millennial kingdom, the Bible says that if we suffer with him, we shall also reign,
Mm-hmm.
and that one day we will reign as princes, and we'll receive crowns, and so we look forward to these eternal rewards, awards, this being with God. And I believe one of the ways that God prepares us for that eternity is by, Jesus talked about the parable of the talents. I'm going to give you this, and I want you to steward over it. And he that does well with 5, we're going to give him 5 more. He that does well with 10, we'll give him 10 more. He that doesn't do well, we're going to take what he's got, And I know there's, maybe different interpretations of that passage. But the idea, Paul said to the church at Corinth, he said, moreover, brethren, it is required in stewards that a man be found faithful, right? And so with that, we have to understand balance in life. You got to be, you do have a job, you have responsibilities, but then you're a husband, you're a father, now you're a grandfather, you're a church member, you're a community member, right? So there's all these facets of your life and all these things that you're responsible for, and these things. So I'm saying this, I'm sorry, I'm rambling, but so God gives us, he wants to teach us value so that we'll get our priorities in order, right? So you mentioned that, so I don't know who it's original to. I've heard it as late as Bob Jones Sr. They said Bob Jones Sr. used to say, duties never conflict. And so duties never conflict, meaning you get your priorities in order, you get your life in order, and God takes care of the details. Like if you'll put him first, you'll give Christ the preeminent place, give God number one, spousal relationship.
Well, I think sometimes people think they conflict when you ought to let them overlap. The thing that pops to my head is when I was a kid growing up, and when my kids were small, at least once a day, mostly the evening meal, we sat at the table and ate, and we talked about things, what went on with them. That don't happen these days much. It's grab something and go to the sofa, TV, your notebook or your phone, and there's no conversation. If I was trying to give advice to a young married couple with kids, is do not eat your evening meal in the living room. Well, you can, but no TV, no cell phones. Let's just talk. And I'm really aggravated with fathers letting their responsibilities flow down to the wife or the mother. And nothing wrong with them doing their, but it's just like leave the whole spiritual thing on them, teaching and everything else. But I think we got to find ways, and I always keep something going with my kids or grandkids, harassing them, I picked at Russell so much when he's little, when he got grown, he was able to take most anything anybody dished out because of that kind of stuff. But I remember picking at my grandkids one day when my daughter was leaving, and I don't remember what it was. She said, why can't you teach them something worthwhile for a change? Because whatever I done, it was going to cause them to give her grief, I guess. And I said, well, let's try this. And I called out her son's name. He was probably 6 years old then. I said, Blake, what's your pop always teach you? He said, to always love Jesus. I said, well, that works. She said, that'll work. And so we got to find ways to keep plugging those things in there and realize as we do that, we're reminding ourselves of those. Throw a couple of scripture verses that mean a lot to me. Romans chapter 12, 1 and 2. I beseech you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable unto God, which is your, when I'm sitting in front of the camera, everything goes blank.
Which is your reasonable.
And be not conformed to this world,
right,
but be ye transformed by the renewing, remember that word, of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. Well, we could talk about those two verses for an hour here, but so I don't drag it out. That renewing Every time I give out the gospel at the jail, it reminds me what's done for me. So when I'm tempted to sin, I think, how dare I? And so it keeps me a little straighter. Every time I'm talking to you now, it's renewing my mind. So this session we have may not help another soul, but it's helping me right now for us just to talk about it. It's renewing my mind. Why? Because God don't think I know it. No, that I may prove to, this guy, that guy, whoever's around me, what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. Sometimes we lump that up. I think it's three things. Now, you got a church member that sits right out there. Of course, it's dark over there. I can't see. It's good if they're sitting in that pew or that seat Sunday morning. It's acceptable if they came for the right reasons. I come off to show off my new suit. No. I came to hear what the Lord's got to say to me. That's acceptable. And the perfect will of God, if I came, if I heard being willing, and I go do it. Those are three things, I think. So those are priorities. That as I do it, I prove what's good and acceptable and in the perfect will of God. And I cover those bases, and I become a new creature. And I think about who's a writer. A missionary to Trinidad one time said to me, he came, I'd been to Trinidad and spent time with him a couple of weeks working, doing carpenter work. And he came to the States, and he was from Trinidad, but yet he was born in India. And we were having supper, and he said, "Come on, let's go. I want you to meet a fellow." And I said, "Well, they're getting through with supper." He said, "Won't take long." So he said, "Get your Bible." We're going out, and I'm thinking we're fixing to get in the car and go. And he says, "Come on out here," and we sat in a swing. And he said, "First you got to know who's writing, who God inspired. You got to hear what he's got." He went on and on about that, but I've thought about that in this one. Paul, he says, "I beseech you" there. And why would Paul say, he's saying, "I'm begging you." Paul wasn't the kind of guy that normally begged for anything. He was, he sort of ruled at one time. But, if he's begging me to do something, then I need to pass that along myself. My kids, people I come in contact with. And it'll change your life. And we think, well, that's just going to help me on Sundays. That's just going to help me here. But it'll help your job. It'll help your fellow workers to get along with you.
Right.
Because now sometimes it may cause some feathers to fly if you take a stand. I remember, and I'm not going to call any names, but I remember one particular fellow was the worst boss I ever had. When I tried to have tracks, "You can't have those here." And on he went and threatened to fire me. Until he had some issues one time, and I kept witnessing to him, and he'd scream at me, "Get out of my office." Well, he eventually got saved. Became the best boss I ever had. In fact, he was almost too good to me then. It was a little embarrassing. Why are you being so good to me? People are looking,
Yeah.
But see, God created all this. It's like I could watch a sewing machine run because the timing and everything is perfect. And we sometimes think God's got things out of timing. I mean, he says in Romans chapter 5, in due time he died. I think, honestly, if I was choosing, I'd have chose back in Abraham's time. But he said that was in the due time, that was the proper time, and I don't understand it, but I don't have to. So I might ask myself the question, look at the time I wasted by not going and doing the jail ministry when I was 20. I mean, you probably have some people hearing this that are my age saying, "Man, I've wasted." Don't look on that. We've encompassed that mountain too long, as Moses found out. And so let's go with what we got here, and it may be the perfect timing that people saw your life then. So I think finding out when God reveals it to you, that's when you gotta get started with it. And that's sometimes I think I wish I had had someone explain that to me better earlier, but then I think, well, maybe the Lord had to let me see some things before I got there.
Experience some things.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Rambled along too long with some questions. I know I probably ought to give you a shorter answer. I'm sorry about that.
You're good. You're fine. It's just us talking. So, you know, it's I don't know. Is it okay to? I mean, it's public knowledge. You're a coroner, right? Or you're a deputy coroner.
Yeah, you can find that out looking on the internet. So
Okay.
I guess it's not a secret.
Right. And so you you know, you see and experience a lot of things dealing with that.
Yeah.
And kind of see, and just with that, you know, from that perspective, what would you say is so pertinent for this generation? You know, I mean, so you're 68 now, and you know, people can say, well, you know, our country's changed, and it's humorous. I heard a guy say the other day. He said, you know, people are walking around saying things are changing, and he said, no, things have changed. You know? And that's true. I mean, man, things have changed, but like in the past 8 or 10 years in our country, with I think a lot of it has to do with technology, information, smartphones, social media. There has been a major shift in our country, and from my perspective, it's no longer segregated in the sense that, you know, used to people say, well, this is going on in L.A. or this is going on in New York or in Atlanta, but now in every small town, like we've got major issues with just life. I don't know. I mean, I don't know. It could be drugs, it could be alcohol, it could be broken homes, broken families, and these things, you know. And so, you know, I guess I'm just saying, like, even with that in mind, this pertinence of eternity, heaven, hell, reality, you know, this is very, very important for people to understand these truths in our day. I don't know if I'm trying to form a question out of this, but
I think I know which way you're going with it, but I'm not sure. I do misunderstand every now and then, but I think, you know, a lot of things we see in this job of mine that I've come to a realization that I didn't see as much before is so many things that happens to people that in this line of work that I do that's not regular natural causes. It tends to all come back to someone trying to satisfy something. Illustration I can give is we might go under a bridge in Atlanta and find a homeless guy that's hooked on drugs. We think, look at him. I mean, he's no job, nowhere to live. I mean, he's turning to drugs because his life. Well, let's look at another side of that. Let's take somebody that most everybody knows the name of. Let's say this guy under the bridge has OD'd and died. You think, what a pity, but you know, he didn't have nothing. But let's take somebody like Whitney Houston. She was a singer for a long time. She was very talented. She was recognized. She had a proper appearance. I don't know, is there a better way for preachers to say that? Can we say she's just pretty?
yeah, she was an attractive lady.
She could get on her Learjet and go anywhere she wanted to.
Right.
She could snap her fingers and people would come to her and want autographs. But what did she die of? It was a drug overdose. Now, what does she have in common with this guy? What's the common denominator here? There's a void in every soul. And our draw is to fill that void. God, I think, has put that within us, a yearning to fill that void. And of course, He's got the answer. It's hymn. A pastor I used to know used to say a man's got to have 3 things to be satisfied. He's got to have, I said that, I'm not sure I remember them all. He's got to have somebody to love, something to do, and something to look forward to. And of course, you know, we could say, you know, there's some other things going on here, but we do have to have someone to love. We do need to have something to do, and we got to have something to look forward to. And Jesus fills all those requirements. And that within us is that void, and everybody's trying to find it. Everybody's trying to find it. And, you know, sometimes they're like a kid with one of these puzzle toys that's got triangles and squares. They're poking, and they're just frustrated. And finally, that oval goes into the oval hole, and you see a satisfaction on that face. Mm-hmm. Now, they're not finished, but there's some satisfaction there. Mm-hmm. So I believe that people are seeking, and they don't understand it. They're not, they haven't, they see, but they can't, they don't understand. They hear, but they don't hear. Mm. And so they're seeking things to satisfy them. That's why you see people running to the lake on Sundays, I mean, pulling the boats. And there was a day when there was no baseball fields used on Sundays or Wednesday nights. Now, man, it go by, and it's not just a different day. It's same regular old day to them. Mm-hmm. Play ball, whatever else you're going to do. And they're doing those things to satisfy them. Recreation has taken over this nation. Mm-hmm. Entertainment of any form and fashion has taken over because people are looking for things to satisfy them. Mm-hmm. And it's caused us to have a warped sense. I mean, we take the maniac of Gadara. I love that message there where it says, you know, that he lived in the graveyards and cut himself with stones, and they couldn't chain him. No man could tame him, the Bible says. And I mean, it was fearful. I mean, if you live close to this guy, would you let your kids out and play at night? No. But now, he got saved. Mm-hmm. And Jesus let the demons go into the swine. They ran off of a steep place and all drowned. And it says the townspeople came out and they find the maniac sitting, clothed and in his right mind, and they were afraid.
Right.
I thought, why were they afraid?
I read that yesterday.
It's crazy. But here's where you go with that. You take a guy that's lost. Some of these guys in the jail, they see us come in, and they don't, like in Walton County, we get to see them face to face. Barrow County, they put me in front of a camera and it's televised in the dorms. Mm-hmm. In fact, where I was last night, a young lady says, I've been seeing you. I said, where have you been seeing me? She said, I was in jail and I saw you and we listened to you. Yeah, but anyway, I tell those folks because sometimes they see us come in and they'll go to their rooms. They don't hear the gospel. It's almost like they're afraid of us. They see a Bible and they shut. And you know how it is. Mm-hmm. I mean, I've been there myself as a young guy. Somebody starts to give you a tract. I don't want that. It might tell me what I need to do. Mm-hmm. But these same people that are afraid of that Bible, or somebody that might tell them the scriptures, aren't afraid to stick something in their arm that's going to make them do crazy things or kill them. They're not afraid to pour something down their throat. So it's a little easier to understand those folks were afraid, because spiritual matters scare folks that aren't ready to digest it yet. Mm-hmm. And so
the interesting, I read that yesterday afternoon. I was reading and I shook my head that this guy, the maniac, they healed him, and then the Bible says they asked Jesus to leave.
Yeah, that's right. They were afraid.
They asked Jesus to leave. It's like, what? You mean this crazy guy that has been hunting and...
Yeah, you think they'd say, hey, hold right here. I think we got a couple of other maniacs. Right. Let's bring them. They might not be as bad as him. Right. But they were fearful of the wrong stuff. And it's that way today. Mm-hmm. There's people that have no idea how much better they would be off if they would darken those church doors and get in here and hear the gospel preached.
Mm-hmm.
But they're afraid of it.
So, so you brought up Whitney Houston. Just in the past couple of years, we've had Whitney Houston, Kate Spade, she committed suicide last year, I guess it was. I think Robin Williams. Maybe?
Yeah, that's right.
Robin Williams. And so then you have these people, obviously, who would have everything the world has to offer. And then you have, a guy at the end of his rope, homeless, like you mentioned. But that common denominator, that underlying theme, and that just goes back to, kind of how we opened the conversation with Ecclesiastes.
Yeah.
Is that these people that, you go through life and vanity, vanity. All is vanity. Like, what's the point? Mm-hmm. Unless you learn. And I think it's fascinating what you said. I've never heard anybody say that. So I'm going to probably go read through Ecclesiastes again and then think on that, where you said, what did you say? All is vanity under the sun?
That's right. If you get over the sun, there's...
But we need to look over the sun.
That's right. And that sun is not S-U-N.
Amen.
But you mentioned common denominator. I feel like I need to throw this in for my doings. As doing coroner stuff, sometimes, things are, you get called out and it's just natural causes, and the person was, 99 years old and lived, you don't think about that much. But what concerns me is a couple of years ago, it seemed like I had a run on teenage suicides. And those really get a hold of you because you think about what they might have become, what they could have become. And I was asked to study my records, all of them, on teenagers, and try to come up with some common denominators. And as I did that, and looking at my notes, the one major common denominator all of them had was heavy in the video games. So that may not be popular with some parents listening to this thing. If you got kids and they're on video games, if I could give any advice, I'd say monitor it or stop it and control it, because I think there's underlying teachings there that the significance of life is not that much.
Well, so with that, a second ago you mentioned parents eating, or families eating together, which is a big deal in our nation. And I think one of the things that grieves my heart, I said this the other day, the Bible says that children are a heritage of the Lord. They're the heritage of the Lord. They're a blessing from God. And, I say we need to remember that children are a blessing, not a burden. Because we live in a day and age which a lot of parents treat their kids like a burden, And I think a lot of times, and I'm not saying this is always the case, and for anybody listening to this or watching this, I don't think it's wrong to have video games or to play, I played duck hunt when I was a kid, whatever. But we need to keep those things in perspective, and whether it's excessive video games, iPads, screen times, television, I think what happens a lot of times in people's homes is those things become babysitters, to where parents can just kind of put the kids in the room, they occupy, you just stay in there, and that way they can go do what they want. They're not bothered. But then what that creates is isolation, and then you have a lot of issues. But I thought it was really interesting that you mentioned eating together. And so, and you mentioned dads being dads, that's a big deal. I was reading, I didn't read all of it, and so I'm not endorsing this book I don't know what the end of the book is because I only skimmed through it. But I downloaded this book last year, and I was thumbing through it, and the title of the book is The Boy Crisis. We're dealing with the emasculation of men in our country, and we're tearing down men and strong men, and there's this thing. But in one of the chapters I was reading in this book called The Boy Crisis, is they said that a common thread that they found in strong men in young men who were confident and young men who were successful is they found out that they ate dinner together as a family at least
You mean
once
I'm right
a
about
week.
one of these things?
You're right, Joe. But one of the things they were saying is they've interviewed, men who get to be in their late 20s, 30s. These are young men, but men who are confident, men who are solid, men who have good communication skills. They're accepted in the workplace and these things. They say one of the common denominators is that they ate dinner together as a family.
I believe that.
Often. And
well, in that time, you find sometimes that relationship with a child has to be of such. I do a message sometimes. I hadn't done it in a lot of years. I need to restudy my old notes, but about kids being, arrows. And I basically, when I do that, bring an arrow and I take all the parts of it and tell you what they signify. A good straight shaft is doctrine. The knock, where the string goes, is that relationship you have with your parents. And sometimes we think, oh, well, we're the bow. No, God's the bow. What we are is a string. Now, unless that string is strung on that bow, we're a limp piece of string. And we can't propel nothing the right direction. So if I get strung on God, I'm tight.
right.
And I can have that relation. You can't even hardly get the knock of the arrow, which is, some of you folks don't know what a knock is. It's where that notch goes on the string.
Right.
And that's that relationship with that parent or parents, which is the string. If you just got the string that's not on the bow, you can't hardly get that thing on it. So you can't have that right relationship. Because there's going to come a time when that arrow is going to be released. And you're going to want a good straight shaft, good doctrine. You're going to want, it had to be on the knock at the right place. And on it goes there. So that right relationship with the bow, too, that string's got to be put on the bow at the right place. And of course, there's a whole message there. There's some crazy stuff I do with some kids stringing the bow for me and teaching some stuff like that, too. But we can learn a lesson just from that right there about our relationship with the parents and being able to be propelled, the kids being propelled through life and pointed in the right direction. Because on the way there, there's going to be some limbs. I mean, I used to hunt with a bow some. Sometimes I'd not see that limb, and I have a little ricochet, and different things would go. But I think we need to consider that. If we know our role, then it helps us. Our role is you say, well, I'm going to make my kids. Well, if we're strung on God, we're going to be able to have the right tension. And of course, I use an old recurve for this. There's probably some more illustrations if you use the compound parts, but I hadn't had the brain to think about all the pulleys and the cams on a compound. But the recurve is pretty much they didn't have compounds during Bible times no way, so I'll stick with the recurve for that. But anyway, I didn't mean to get on a tangent there either.
No, you're fine. Well, so I would, we'll probably bring this thing to a head and kind of close it. But as I'm thinking back through our conversation, when we first sat down, before we flipped the camera on, you may mention one of duties never conflict, but then also just that matter of the importance of prayer, praying for your children.
That's right.
But also praying, you said Sunday, you were trying to decide to come to church to hear Gabby sing or to go to the jail.
Yeah.
And then you said, so I prayed, and I felt led to go to the jail, and a man got saved.
That's right.
And you shared that with Gabby, and she spiritually minded.
Well, I didn't. My wife actually conveyed that to her because
Okay.
I hadn't at that point talked to her. But
Right.
yeah, she seems to have more spiritual maturity than what I think might be the average 11-year-old. I wish I had that at that time.
Right.
But which, that goes some teaching she's got at home, which, see, there again, just made an understanding when those duties didn't have to conflict.
Well, and so that's, You know, my as you were saying that, I think just kind of what spoke to me is that you approached it in prayer, and you got direction from the Lord. You know, and if you would have felt the Lord leaning you to be here, you'd have been here. You know, or if you'd have felt the Lord, you went, you took time to stop and say, Lord, what do you want? How do you want this thing to go? You know, and then you took the step. And so I think the underlying current through our whole conversation and the different stories we've shared and the ideas and this kind of thing is this matter of living with an eternal perspective. You know, I love, so almost every story you shared, whether it's, you know, you be in aviation, a coroner, or, you know, it was all coming back to the gospel. And so what I really appreciate about you, Joe, is there is an underlying subconscious current in your life, and probably subconscious isn't the right word, but a consciousness to share the gospel and to, you understand the need for men's salvation. And
Not enough, though.
Not enough.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you're at the gas pump and you think, man, that guy just talked with me while we were pumping gas. There's been times in my life when I said, let me see if I can turn the conversation toward these matters. And it was almost like, not a game per se, but a challenge to see if we could do that. And I found myself in this day and time, the times have changed for sure. There was a time when you could, so much easier it seemed than now, knock on doors and give out the gospel. Nowadays, it seems to be a whole different ball game. I mean, I still think we need to do that, and we need to invite people to church and witness to them. But it's not the same playing field as it was 30 years ago. And so you say, well, okay, I give up. No, let's reinvent ourselves is a phrase that I've used a lot, and find ways to do it. And I like conveying to the people that I'm not saying you don't need to go out and visit, but find ways to do it where you are every day. Sad to say, I've known some people that I had a whole different view of because I saw them at church only. But then another time, I find out down the road through someone telling me stuff, this is two different people. It's a Sunday person, it's a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday person. And I think when I'm pumping gas, I look at the guy over there, and, you know, he may be vile in his conversation, he may be, but what I need to look at him, and this is what I've told the guys in the jail, I said, y'all may wonder why I'm coming here, because you think we get paid? We don't. There's no pretty paintings on the wall. They didn't have us coffee and donuts. Honestly, they just assumed we didn't come because it's more work for them. But I come because I have come to realize through reading that word that you're a valuable person. Some of them look because they've been told that they aren't worth much anymore. But if Jesus Christ spilt his blood on the cross, that tells me that they're valuable. So that guy pumping gas over there, if he was valuable to God, why don't I talk to him? You know, I remember I work part-time at a funeral home sometimes. I do all kind of crazy stuff, but I had to go meet a guy at the cemetery to him show me where the grave site was so I could mark it for the grave diggers to do their job. Well, there was a guy I noticed sitting over against a tombstone propped up. I thought, who is this guy? Is he homeless or whatever? And then my vision became, here's a soul over here. Let me go find out what's going on with him. I asked him how he was doing. He said, not too good. This tombstone's my dad, and this tombstone's my grandfather, and I'm just depressed. And I was able to share with him the gospel, and he got saved, propped up against the tombstone. And I thought, you know, my first sight was a homeless guy, probably. He wasn't homeless. He walked there from Brazelton, and it was in Auburn area where he'd walked to, because he didn't have a ride, just to see, because he just wanted to be close to where his dad and granddad was, because he didn't have some answers. But we talked about some answers to his problems, and he got up and he had a bounce in his step when he left and had a plan. And so and all that happened not because of me, but because I took a moment to see a fella, instead of outward appearance, but a guy that had a soul that Jesus died for. And I wish I was that way more. And who's it up to do it? It's up to me, I guess. So if you listen to me today, don't think I think I've got it. I've arrived at anything. I haven't arrived. I think I told you before when you asked me about doing this. We talked about Russell. I said he's a better boy than I am. So I still got some growing to do.
Amen.
But
yeah, I certainly. I heard Dr. R.B. Willett. You ever heard of him?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So he was preaching a sermon one time, and he said none of us arrived. He said the problem with arriving is once you get there, you don't. He said once you arrive, you don't go anywhere. And so all of us are going forward.
Well, even if you think you're busy, it's like a old man I used to say. I'd say, what have you been up to? You been busy? And he said, oh, I've been very busy, but it's like a rocking chair. There's a lot of motion, but I'm not getting anywhere.
Right.
So are you getting anywhere? And you can't measure. That's the good thing about God. He doesn't say you got to have results. You just got to be faithful as a steward and let me do the results. And sometimes I get a little caught up at the jail thinking, man, I haven't seen very many results lately. And sometimes I wonder about those. But every now and then the Lord will drop me a crumb that tells me I got quickly, I know you're probably out of time, but I got a letter in the mail one time from the address was a lady's name, and it was Hawaii address. My wife came in and she said, who do you know in Hawaii? I said, I tell you what, you open it and we'll both find out at the same time. So she opened it, and it was a sister of a guy that had gotten saved in the Barrow County Jail, had got out, and he was following the Lord. He was involved in some things, and she just wanted to thank me and let me know. And I said, Lord, I know you didn't have to do that. It's the cost of a stamp, but I appreciate you letting me know something like that every now and then, even though you don't owe it to me. But I'm glad you let us have something like that every now and then.
Amen. Well, any closing remarks?
No, I think I should have let you do more of the talking instead of talking so much.
No. They hear me talk all the time. That's one of the reasons why I wanted to do this. So, yeah, I think right there at the end, I think you answered. I had some questions. What would you say to parents of this generation? But I think we kind of covered some of those points.
Yeah. Well, I don't have all the answers there, but you observe things as things go along, and sometimes I'm not real smart, but repetition teaches us some things. And I think that helps out getting older. You've seen a lot of things. But just because somebody listening thinks, well, I'm this old and I got some wisdom, but we see in the book of Job where not one of his three original friends, but he threw in this fourth guy that what's good about him, he was the young guy, and he started teaching them a lesson. But he did say one thing. He said, old men aren't always wise. And that's the case. But of course he wasn't either, because the Lord spoke to the three friends. He spoke to Job, but he didn't even acknowledge his presence, And so we don't need to get caught up in what we think our own wisdom is. We just need to be committed and move forward, and I think God will give it to us as we can absorb it.
Amen. All right. Well, Brother Joe, I really appreciate it.
I appreciate the opportunity.
All right, guys, so thank y'all for hanging out with us today and for our episode of Biblical Perspective, and look forward to having another one soon. God bless you.